We come to the seventh session, and with this session, we will be completing the first chapter, Samadhi part, of the book Yoga Sutras. As we know, the book Yoga Sutras by Patanjali, it has 4 chapters. The first chapter, Samadhi part, has 51 sutras, 51 statements, aphorisms. So we'll be completing the first chapter today. We have seen till Sutra 40, and in this session we will see 41 to 51. Patanjali in this 11 sutras is describing the states of Samadhi and states near to Samadhi and various flavors of those states. Various flavors of what is called the state of enlightenment in different schools. Some will call it enlightenment, some will call it half enlightenment. Some will say either you are enlightened or you are not. There is no halfway. But Patanjali takes a step-by-step approach. And let us see how we go about it. 41 to 51, it will reveal itself. 41, he says, when the ordinary compulsive mental activities slow down and the mind is pure as a crystal, which means pure as a crystal means it's silent, it's pure, there are no thoughts. No thoughts in the ordinary sense of the term, that you keep thinking about the past or the future most of the time, or about the present of some object, some project you are involved in. So that ordinary functioning of the mind is not there. In that sense, the mind is substantially silent. You are no longer concerned with the present, or no longer concerned with the past, no longer with the future, and in the present, you are not involved in any worldly project. So the mind is substantially silent, and in that silence, substantial silence, in that substantial silence, certain things happen. And here, I feel the chronological order of the sutras needs a change. Somehow, over thousands of years of transmission, the chronological order of the sutras is not what Patanjali would have put it originally. So there are certain sutras which should be coming later, certain sutras which should be coming prior. They seem to be in a different order. So giving liberty to those who have changed the order, we will go by as it is conventionally written down, at present at least. So 41 says, when the mind is substantially silent, one sees or experiences as one the seeker of the object and the act of having the object. This is called samapati. Sama is equanimity, equanimous. It is equanimous seeing with equanimity. We see as one the seeker of the object, that is ourselves, the object that we are looking at, and the act of having the object. You can also look at it as this epistemological description can also be converted into a language of consumption in which this sutra is written, in which you call the seeker of the object as the one who wants to have it, the consumer, the object of consumption and the act of consumption, or the one who wants to have it, the seeker, the object that is sought for, and the act of accepting or having that object. Grunami. You can translate this in epistemological language as I have done, or literally in terms of the receiver and the consumer of the object and the act of consumption, or you can talk in psychological ordinary terms. Anyway, it can be translated, but what it means is this, that Patanjali is describing a state of sampati. And he says this is a psychological state where the mind is substantially silent, and therefore the seeker of the object and the act of having the object are seen as one. This can happen only when the desire is the desire is unmediated by the I-ness of our personality, the active psychological and social I-ness of personality. U.G. Krishnamurti talks about this state where he says that it is one movement. The stimulus and the response to stimulus is one movement, and the one who responds is nowhere present. In the sense of the psychological, the ordinary I as we have. Obviously, the fact that you know that this happens, which means somewhere something is recording it, something is knowing it. But the ordinary I is not there. There is some hidden I. There is some hidden entity, not necessarily I, but an entity that knows and that records, but not the ordinary psychological and social I that we have in operation all the time. So UG says the stimulus and response is one movement. And this is what is referred to by Patanjali. In psychoanalysis, we have no parallel of this kind of ego-free states of being. Because there we are also entangled with the definition of ego, because one part of ego is unconscious. So then we have to separate the ego into two. The psychological and social conscious ego, or at least the psychological and social ego, and a systems ego which is working in the unconscious. And when we do this, the unconscious ego remains, because biologically I know I am different than somebody else. That there is a biological sense of I that remains, but the social I, that goes away. And here we can have two states. So he says, when you see this as one, it is the state of samapati. And he says there are two parts of this, two versions of this state of samapati. One state in which the object, the name of the object and the knowledge of the object exists. So if I see an apple in front of me, I know there is an apple in front of me. I know it is an apple. I know it is a fruit of X color and Y flavor and Z nutrients. But I don't have a distinct sense of I and the apple being separate. The cognitive memory is there. The affective memory also is there. But the separateness of I, the object, and the clear separation of the process of consumption, that is not there. And this is a state in which for a very enduring period of time you live after you have attained the state of no thought. So when you are state of complete no thought and no object, and when you, after some time, when you have a need to fulfill hunger or to do some work, you have to get into the object world, and in that getting into the object world, often you get into this state. So this is a state which usually occurs after a profound state of no thought. When you come back to engage with the world. But Patanjali talks about the reverse, that you can have this state first and then go to the state of no thought, which is also true. It is possible. Not only possible, but for many, a large group of people, this may be a good step-by-step approach. That there is the I-ness in the consumption process, I-ness in the uh, engagement with the world is overcome. But the cognitive and the affective knowledge about the object exists. It is very much there, and therefore the processes of survival, fear, self-preservation at the unconscious level would be on. And this is called savitarka sampatti or savitarka samadhi. So this is a state where the name and knowledge of the object exists, but the sense of I who is consuming the object does not exist. So first is to give up the sense of I. There is consumption. There is an unconscious need, and in the unconscious definitely there is a sense of I. But the conscious sense of I is overcome, but there is still cognitive and affective knowledge about the object and awareness of the process of consumption, but they are seen as a natural process without interference of the psychological conscious I. This is called the savitarka sampatti or savitarka samadhi. And then you have a nirvitarka samadhi, where the chitta has become pure. Only the object shines forth. So it all happens in the unconscious. There is need, there is hunger, and if the body feels it needs an apple, you don't have to think about it. You look around and the body goes towards apple. The whole object knowledge, the object name is all there in the unconscious. It is not in the conscious. The conscious is pure. And in the conscious, all you see is the object in front of you and an inward drive towards consuming that object. So this state is called nirvitarka samadhi. But you are still aware, you are still conscious, you still have a sense of unconscious, very clear unconscious sense of I. It may also be you still retain the sense of psychological I. Once this process is over, that's also possible. And then, so here he defines a nirvitarka samadhi, which is a deeper form of savitarka samadhi. A similar thing we saw in second session also. There was a state of mind defined, and then he said, practice this for some time and add to it certain more things, and you will go into a deeper state. So again, he does the same thing, and therefore I feel personally that somewhere the chronology is not right. Because 2 or 3 times the same thing is repeated, that you are given a state, intermediate state, and then deepening of that state, and you have different words by and large saying the same thing. And he himself says in 44, in the same way, subtle states of savichar and nirvichar samadhi are talked about. So he is referring to his context of those times when it was very popular to talk about savichar samadhi and nirvichar samadhi. Savichar is samadhi where thoughts exist, and samadhi where thoughts don't exist. Today, many people say there is nothing like samadhi if thoughts exist. And most of the times they don't make clear whether they are referring to conscious thoughts or unconscious thoughts. And in nirvichar also nobody makes clear, is it the conscious which is at rest or the whole mind, including the unconscious, which is at rest. However, he says, just as people talk of savichar and nirvichar, he is talking about savitarka and nirvitarka. So in a approximate sense, savitarka is almost like savichar and nirvitarka is almost like nirvichar. one way to uh, there is one way to differentiate nirvitarka from nirvichar, because the nirvichar samadhi is deeper than nirvitarka samadhi. So one way to look at it is that what was prevalent in Patanjali's time, savichar and nirvichar, are not exactly savitarka and nirvitarka, but they are close approximates. One way to differentiate between nirvitarka and nirvichar is this: in nirvitarka, the object shines forth, the object is still there. So in an unconscious sense, if the object is in consciousness, cognitive comprehension of the object would be happening in the unconscious mind, even if it is not consciously happening. But in nirvichar, there is no object per se in the mind. And therefore, corresponding to that object, there is no question of any unconscious cognitive action happening, which is there. So in that sense, nirvichar samadhi is deeper than nirvitarka samadhi, because in nirvitarka samadhi, you have the object. But here you don't have any object, you just have blankness, a state of no thought. So in fact, you can talk about going from savitarka to nirvitarka to nirvichar. Whereas savichar can be a close approximate of savitarka, but nirvitarka is definitely different from nirvichar. But in an approximate, in a colloquial way, Patanjali says that these two subtle ways are ways of talking about inner states, just as people are talking about savichar and nirvichar in society, and that is what was happening in his time. But the way he proceeds, instead of using savichar and nirvichar, he is using savitarka and nirvitarka. When in fact, he could have put after nirvitarka or nirvichar. And then he says, these subtle states remain only till form persists, and beyond it cease to exist. So he's coming to nirvichara now. He says, the object or the form ceases to exist. So in savitarka and nirvitarka, the form persists. But after nirvitarka, you can go to nirvichara. So instead of taking this nirvichara as a synonym of nirvitarka, take this as a deeper form after nirvitarka. And he does not define this state, but you can actually define nirvichara that way and put it here, 45, where there is a complete blankness and only uh, the state of no thought persists, and there is no object per se in the conscious mind. These are the states psychoanalysis does not deal with. It has no idea of how to deal with them, because most of the time they don't even think it is possible. And they have also not studied so deeply and so minutely the higher ranges of human mind above the normal. However, the savitarka and nirvitarka, the savichar and nirvichar, still is not the final station. These are called sabij samadhis, because at a psychological and biological level, most of the time, the self is still there. The seed or the beej of the self is still there. Unconsciously it is there most of the time. Unconsciously it is there all the time. Consciously it is there most of the time. And in 47 he says, staying in nirvichar samadhi for a long time. So now he is not talking about nirvitarka, he has come to nirvichar. So he is actually finding the right word here. Staying in nirvichar, which would be after nirvitarka, for a long time, and developing competence of that state, one enters the realm of deeper spirituality. One enters into the state of a new kind of knowledge which happens, a new way of looking at the mind, a completely different geography and chemistry, not chemistry, different functionality of the mind, a completely different uh, geography, structure, and functioning of the mind appears to you. Intuitive knowledge appears, mystical knowledge appears, parapsychological knowledge appears. And there one gets into deeper spirituality. I have put the word deeper because to say that then you get into spirituality would raise the question, what about all the sadhana that you do to reach this state? Because this state is not a default state. It is a rare state and it appears, it comes to you after a long sadhana, and for a large number of people it never comes despite a long sadhana. So when he says spirituality is meaning not only deep but very deep states of realms of spirituality and mysticism. So staying in the nirvichar samadhi for a long time and developing a competence of that state, one enters a deeper state of spirituality. One starts experiencing differently the feel of oneself, the feel of a state of no thought, a different kind of peace and bliss, and a distance from all that is thought and felt. So a new kind of distance and freedom from all the cognitive material and affective material. In that state of deeper spirituality, one comes to know the truth of reality. So deeper spiritual knowledge, deeper mystical knowledge, deeper parapsychological knowledge happens in that state of deeper spirituality when you get to know the truth of reality, the spiritual and philosophical truth of reality. Some people have even reported knowing the deeper subatomic physical truth of reality. In some of the Jain and Buddhist texts, we see some people going down to that level also. But usually what is meant is the deeper spiritual and philosophical truth of reality. The knowledge obtained here is different from the knowledge obtained by senses and logic, which is what our sciences do. We obtain knowledge by senses and logic, and owing to its essential, pure, deep, and rare nature. So this knowledge is different from the knowledge you normally obtain from sciences, and sciences are based upon using senses and logic, induction and deduction. But this is more knowledge by revelation, knowledge by intuition. And this knowledge has the characteristic, it is essential, it is not specific, like you don't get boiling point of mercury or chemical which will cure COVID, the molecular structure of that chemical, not that kind of knowledge, but knowledge which is essential in nature, pure in nature, deep and rare, very important. We are talking about rare experiences. These are supernormal experiences. Out of 1,000,000 people, not more than 5 people will have those experiences. So it is less than 0.1% of population which will have these experiences. So these experiences cannot be put to the test of the social average. These are very aristocratic in nature, and by that they don't become untrue. Even though not common, they are true. rare but true. Not only true but deep and profound, liberating and allowing us to obtain the goal of evolution. So the knowledge here that is obtained is different, and because it's not by senses and logic, it is by intuition and revelation, and it is by grace, and therefore the characteristic of this knowledge is essential, pure, deep, and rare. Rare is very important because all that is talked about in Yoga Sutras are rare states of mind. These are not ordinary states of mind. These are not supernormal states of mind. The samskaras born from this true knowledge liberate from the hold of ordinary samskaras. So Patanjali is not adamant on erasing all samskaras. He says we can make use of this law of nature that good samskaras can overcome and heal our ordinary and pathological samskaras. So he's not talking about formatting the disc as the only way. He says you can have the good overturning and healing the bad. So this true knowledge changes in our unconscious mind the ordinary tendencies, ordinary motivations, ordinary modes of thinking, behaving, and feeling. It's a very fundamental restructuring of the mind. Such profound restructuring that we cannot even dream of in psychotherapy. In fact, we should be dreaming of. Time has come to dream of it, where we take psychotherapy for spiritual purposes. One person I saw talked about taking ISTDP method for spiritual development. I think it's a very good move in the right direction. We can take the whole of psychotherapy for spiritual purposes, just as we can bring spiritual knowledge for psychotherapy purposes. This synthesis will enrich both and do good to everyone. It will happen eventually. In the next 10 years, it will happen. And then he talks about that when all sanskaras cease to operate, nirbij samadhi happens. And this is called not a state of no thought, but a state where the self ceases to exist. And usually this is oneness with existence, the state of oneness with existence, where the self ceases to exist. In a sense, it's deactivated. It does not cease to exist because nobody lives in that state forever. One comes back to a more to a state which is sabija state, where the self exists. One comes back to that state. So self is not erased, but the self is deactivated. And this is very important. Often everything is not erased, but deactivation is more common than erasure. But this weakens the self, that is definitely so. That even after you come down from this state into a more relatively ordinary state, not the ordinary state of a normal man, but compared to nirbija samadhi, when you come down from nirbija samadhi to a sabija state, the bij is definitely weakened. The seed is definitely weakened. So the self after the experience is never the same as the self before the experience. And during the experience, it's completely deactivated, no doubt about it. Now, this brings us to a question, very important question, that if one has gone through these steps, savitarka sampati, nirvitarka sampati, nirvichar samadhi, sabija samadhi, and then finally nirbija samadhi, does that transform you completely, or are these rare experiences not so causative in permanent self-transformation. And here we see two kinds of situations. In one group of people, a complete self-transformation happens with this kind of rare experiences. But that is rare. In a large majority of people who have these rare experiences, in 95%, a complete self-transformation does not happen with these experiences. And these experiences only transform you to a minor extent, 5%, 10%, 15%. But after these experiences are over, you have a light of these experiences, a new perspective because of these experiences. You are changed in a fundamental way because of these experiences. And then you work upon the remaining untransformed part of you. And based upon how strong that is, it takes its own time. So what is called in Tantra as the full chakra transformation, every chakra is transformed completely. That takes a long time. Most cases, all chakras are not transformed with this kind of rare experiences. After these experiences are over, the remnants of these experiences and the memory of these experiences and the transformation which happened during these experiences, that continues. But one has to work consciously for one's transformation. And there, even after these experiences happen, when you go into self-transformation, the work is eased, but work is not automatically done. And there you require psychoanalysis, you require Eastern psychology, you require all sorts of knowledge and all sorts of tools to help you in completing the process of self-transformation and self-purification, even after these experiences have completely happened. But one good part is, once these experiences start, an automatic self-transformation process also starts. And that can happen because of the psychic coming forward in its own way, or higher forces from above coming down, as Sri Aurobindo describes. So once these rare experiences start, these rare experiences into themselves bring about a self-transformation. The remnants and light of it and the understanding of it brings about another ease of self-transformation. And there is an automatic self-transformation going on. But in addition to it, we have to work on ourselves. The sadhana continues for most people. And for most people, the self-transformation is not an event. It is an event come ongoing process. Ongoing process before the rare event and an ongoing process after the rare event. And the full transformation takes a long time, even after this deep, profound, and rare experiences happen. And that transformation has to be consciously done. A part of it, a substantial part of it has to be consciously done. Substantial part of it happens on its own. And that part which is consciously done, that needs the knowledge of spirituality, psychoanalysis, psychology, philosophy, anything that helps you. Knowledge, tools, techniques, psychotherapy per se, spiritual meditation per se, spiritual practices and courses, everything helps on that part. So the sadhana essentially continues. Thank you. With this, we complete the first of the 4 chapters of Yoga Sutras, the Samadhi Pada. And what we see here is definitions of the state of some different kinds of states of Samadhi and some essential ways to facilitate that process, but not a detailed way. In the next chapter, Sadhan Pada, we will see the process details of how to get into the state of samadhi or state of intermediate states, right, that Patanjali describes in the first chapter. So first chapter defines and details out the goal states, the final goal state and the intermediate goal states, which ultimately lead to the final goal state. And the second chapter talks about the process. The third chapter will go into the mystical attainments on the way, and the fourth chapter will go into the essential setting in of the goal state, attainment of the goal state. So the first chapter essentially was defining and detailing out the goal state and mentioning out in an essential sense how the process will go without detailing out the process. The second chapter we will detail out the process. Thank you.